Hello, I'm Malcolm Jae O'Shea, and this is MJORiding. I'm an actor and a comedian, living in Los Angeles, making my dreams come true. And just last year, I got a motorcycle and learned how to ride it. And this channel is my journal as I ride my motorcycle all around Los Angeles, living my actor dreams. From film location to film location, to auditions, to CovidTests, to tourist locations. You name it, I have video footage of me riding my bike. On this channel, you get to see it all. So please, hit that like and subscribe button, sit back, and enjoy the ride. Welcome back to MJORiding. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that our music today in this episode is brought to you by Pronghorn, Los Angeles. They are available for listening on Spotify and Apple Music. In today's episode, I'm going to get a little bit dark, and I'm going to go over some uncomfortable truths about working in the background world. So stay tuned all the way to the end, and you'll get to hear about some of the more unpleasant things that we have to deal with in the background world, and how I handle them. And for the stories today, I have two background gigs I'm going to talk about. The time I worked on Unicorn, and the first time I worked on Good Girls. Spoiler alert, the second time I worked on Good Girls was really awesome, and is definitely going to be a story for another day, so hit that subscribe button. And in today's video, I'm taking a motorcycle ride to a COVID test for 84 Brady. I will pause the story when I get to the COVID test and kind of talk you through what you're seeing there. It's not a whole lot. It's not very exciting. I'm sorry. I will cut out some of the downtime waiting for them to tend to me at the COVID test as well. So hopefully it's not too boring, but you'll get to see what it's like to have a COVID test in Hollywood. Our first story is about the time I worked on the set of Unicorn. And our second story is actually I worked back-to-back days. This is still October 2019, that first month I registered at Central Casting, and the same week that I shot that commercial, literally within a week from when I shot Superstore. They really fire you out the cannon at Central Casting when you're non-union and you first register. Once I was registered and started working, I got a few gigs right back to back, including Unicorn and Good Girls on back-to-back days. So the first story is the Unicorn. So the Unicorn was another short, easy day. It was a 2 p.m. call time, and it was at Paramount Studios on the lot there. They had me park on Gower Street. There's a garage there. So as always, I had to bring clothes. But the thing I distinctly remember about the wardrobe on this one was the shirt I was wearing was based on the palette that they'd given us in the email. Was this really cool checkered plaid shirt that I like to wear, and I actually believe I have headshots in that shirt. That was the shirt I wore to the gig, and when I was waiting for wardrobe to approve me or to dress me for the day, they took one look at me and they're like, oh no, you can't wear that. That's too much like our hero shirt. I was like, okay. And so they put me in their clothes for that particular job, so they took my voucher from me. And then I go to where we're waiting for holding, and it's really close to where set is, and they're already working. We must have been a second batch of background brought in later in the day, which is not an uncommon thing that they do out here. They'll have background players called an earlier time, and they'll either wrap them or they'll add more depending on what the scene's calling for. So we were probably a second or third batch of background coming in at later call time, and so they were already working when we got there. So when I was on my way to holding, I could see them filming, and I looked right at Walton Groggins, and he was literally wearing the same shirt that the wardrobe person had just commented on. So then I was like, okay, that's what they mean. So I do remember that. That was a distinct thing about that day. The scene in and of itself was shot in this cafe bar area that's actually the same cafe that the tourists for the Paramount Lot tours have access to. So they literally just closed down a section of that, and then by the time we were filming the other stuff, I think they had closed down a majority of it because the tours only go to a certain hour at Paramount. Everything on a studio lot essentially has multiple purposes, or double purpose at least. So it's a functional restaurant and it's their film set, and that's literally how they used it. And so the scene that we were filming was a date between Walton Goggins and Sarah Blue, and I was basically just in the bar area. They gave me a drink and they're like, just stand here, pantomime. It was really simple, really easy. I remember when I watched the episode that we shot on that date, that I don't believe I found myself. Maybe I found like my arm or something like that. Something that's not very uncommon to happen in the world of working background is just not being caught on camera. And I was placed pretty deep in the setups that we were placed in, so you're just filler in the background. You're literally background, and it's not even in focus most of the time. But I had a lot of fun. I definitely met and worked with some cool people. Can't tell you anybody off the top of my head that particularly sticks out, but yeah, it was a great experience. I'm gonna turn around real quick and get my bearings straight. And as I said earlier, it was a pretty short day, so we wrapped around 8 p.m. and I was pretty happy about that because the next day I had a call time, somewhat earlier call time to work on Good Girls. We went to the Universal lot again for that. It was where we were called, and I remember distinctly they had us parking at the ET garage for that one. Alright, so this is a good place to pause our stories, both in the video and where we're at in the stories. If you can't tell, I'm a little bit lost here, but don't worry, actually find the CovidTest center just ahead. It's right there across the street. And you'll see why I missed it. It's kind of tucked away and hidden, and that's not uncommon for these. These COVID tests, they're kind of tucked all over the city, all over the county. This one is kind of in a little bit of an abandoned industrial park area, tucked between some buildings here. Then the other ones are in parking garages, other ones in parking lots behind churches. There's often in abandoned strip malls where they'll have like one rented out storefront. Essentially what happens here is you check in with the first person. This is very common in almost all of them. And usually you can stay in the car like this. Sometimes you have to park, but at any rate, you check in with the first person, they get your information. On this particular set, you had to provide a QR code. To get the QR code, basically what happens is when you get the booking, they send you an email. And then on that email, you go to the website and you register to take your COVID test, and you pick your location. Usually there's maybe 3 or 4 locations at different corners of Los Angeles. So you pick the one closest to you, and you put in your date of birth and name, and they send you an email back with your confirmation and your time and your QR code. So then you show up there. If you don't have a QR code, usually they'll ask you the show. They'll ask you your name and date of birth. They usually confirm it no matter what, even if you have a QR code. Then you go to the next station, and at the next station, I'm going to do a little jump cut here in the video so you don't have to wait like I did. And in the next station, the test is administered. There's different ways that they administer the test. So sometimes they just assist you with the test. Like, for example, when they have you do the spit test, where you have to spit into a tube, they're not going to hold a tube up to your mouth. So, yeah, they just give you the equipment and tell you what to do. There's also times where they have you swab your own cheeks, or they have you swab your own nose and you do it yourself. Then there's definitely times where they administer it. Like very early on in the COVID days, when they try to skewer your brain through your nose, that was definitely them administering it. Those were definitely uncomfortable COVID tests. This one, I believe, was just a gentle swab up the nose, which is the most common. On this particular set, he needed me to blow my nose, so I had to actually end up taking off my helmet and blow my nose because I had an issue blowing it with the helmet on. Go figure. So you'll get to see my face here in a minute. Then they collect your, however you give them your sample, they collect it and send you on your way. Alright, so back to our stories. So I'll talk about wardrobe as I always do, and on this one I remember distinctly that they had us bring in red wardrobe. They wanted to have us look like Detroit Red Wings fans, but I don't think they could have any logos. So they wanted us to wear like reddish jerseys and stuff like that, but preferably not with logos. And then I ended up getting the red leather jacket instead because I didn't have a red jersey or anything like it. But then I was getting compliments the whole night about how cool I looked in the red leather jacket, and everybody thought it was mine. And I kind of wished it was, but it wasn't, and I did return it like a good background player. And then after we got our wardrobe, they loaded us all on these buses, and they took us all the way across town. I believe it was to Burbank, to a bar called Half Times, and they had it closed for the day, and they had tents all around it and trailers in the back alley and all sorts of stuff. And it was just this little tiny family restaurant bar that you'd see in just any town in America, really, just kind of crammed on the side of the road in Burbank, like I said, between an alley and a pretty busy city street. And then Hollywood just sets up their equipment all around it. It just takes it over for the day. So that was pretty cool. When we got there, now again, this is pre-COVID days. We got there, they're like, all right, there's a bunch of you, it's tight in there, just crowd on in, and then we'll place you where we need to. So you get inside this tiny little bar, and I believe there must have been 150 of us. They had as many in there as they could get away with fire code and to be able to get the camera equipment around, because they wanted to make it look like it was a playoff game for hockey, and we were in there celebrating watching the match. And I also remember distinctly that they had up on TV screens of the bar, they had it was anywhere from 2 minutes to a 5-minute loop of a hockey match. There was like a score and a steal and a couple things going on in it, but it was not distinct to what we were supposed to act to. And then there was an AD who stood behind the bar who would just give a little hand wave or signal, and then we were all to like jump up and roar and wave our arms and act like somebody scored, and then we'd have to do it silently as well. That was actually a lot of fun. And then they had people dressed as servers walking around handing out real food, and I believe we had beers and stuff. They're probably O'Doul's, it's usually what it is on set. And then also on the Unicorn set, I had a drink as well, and it was, I think they gave me like a rum and coke on that one, but it wasn't actual alcohol. But I will say this, that sometimes it is. And I do have a funny story that I will share in a later episode where I was on a set positioned really close to the bar, and they were using real alcohol. That's a fun story that you'll have to hit that subscribe button if you want to hear that one, because I'm not going to tell you what show it is. You're just going to have to listen and catch the story when I do talk about it eventually. But I will share that story. So then we're at the Half Times in Burbank, and we're filming this scene where basically the good girls, and all three of them were there. I got to see them. It was Christina Hendricks, Retta, and Mae Whitman. They were all very cool and kind and very professional, obviously. They keep to themselves, as they should. One of the things you have to understand when you work background is the people you're working with, the actors, are working. So it is not your place to sit there and have a conversation with them or ask them about their day or anything. Ask them for advice. And they give you this speech pretty often, especially when you're working around some actors who are more particular than others. And I'm bringing this up during this story, not because this happened on this set, but because it didn't. I certainly would never, ever, ever want to infer that any particular actor is less friendly to background than others, only because I understand, and I hope those of you listening do as well, that it is a profession and these people are working, and it is difficult work that they're doing. It does require a lot of concentration, and they're dealing with memorized lines, with memorized movement, and trying to display specific emotions without showing like you're trying to display specific emotions. It's a complex job, and it requires a lot of concentration. It's not really the kind of space you want to be in where you would be constantly interrupted by people. And so when you're in a room with 150 background, you can't stop and have a conversation with every one of them that likes to tell you how wonderful you are. That being said, there are occasions and times when you can maybe see an actor and just say, hey, I really appreciate your work, something like that. That does happen, and I've done that. And sometimes they'll respond and they'll talk back to you, and sometimes they won't, or sometimes they'll just give you a general thanks and keep going on their way. And that's just the way it is. the fact of the matter is, when you're working background or working probably almost any job on set, principal actors and directors and certain people, are just really not to be bothered. They talk to you first is typically how it works. The good girls and lovely actresses who portray them, I have nothing but good things to say about them. They were all sweet and kind. I did not see any sort of this, and there was no speech about this on that set. And same thing on the Unicorn set. Those sets were perfectly cool, and most people in the background world, once you've done a couple sets, you don't need to be told twice to not bother the principal actors. But that will lead to another part of this story as far as just background players bothering people. But I'll get to that in a minute. One of the other things I remember on this set was that they had ordered pizza, and I was absolutely heartbroken. This was one of the first times since becoming vegan, and therefore swearing off cheese, that I had been in a group situation where everybody in the group was having pizza. And I believe that they actually had a vegan pizza on set. I believe maybe May Whitman's a vegan, and they had one on set, but by the time the background players, the non-union background players, got through the line, there was none left, so I didn't get any. And I remember not feeling bad about it, but being proud of myself for not caving and just having the pizza. You have to understand that I've not always been vegan, and this was probably at that point in time I'd only been vegan for a year, and pizza was one of my favorite foods before I went vegan, so I was really proud that on this set I passed the pizza test. And that was the first time that I could say that I was challenged and passed, and I've passed every time since. And I have another funny story about a pizza set where I actually got pizza, no cheese on it, but again, I'll share that story on another episode. I know, you're thrilled waiting to hear about the pizza. Okay, so another interesting that happened on this day on set was because we were out in the world, out in Burbank, so life is going on around us. So while we're out there, everybody's eating pizza, except me, crammed in this alleyway behind this bar, and all of a sudden, cops just showing up, left and right, not where we're at, but over in the side street that connects the alleyway to the main street. And then there's this car that's just pulled over there, and there's this guy who's just, he couldn't even really stand on his 2 feet. And they pulled him out of the car, and apparently, kind of overheard some of the conversation going on. This guy had been severely intoxicated and had been driving, and they had noticed, and thankfully they had come and surrounded him real quick. But it was right there, right by this film set with all this equipment and people just hanging out, eating pizza. It was like, hey, this is the real world. This is what it's like to work on location in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, technically Burbank. It's all the same out here. And then earlier I mentioned about background players bothering people. Well, sometimes background players bother each other. I've been on sets, again, not this episode, sorry, where background players have actually gotten into physical altercations, like fist fights even. I've been on sets where people tried to egg me on. Thankfully, I had cooler head to prevail. And on this particular set, I wouldn't say somebody was egging me on, but I was a little bit disturbed by one of the background players. Dom was actually there on this set, again, I believe. I was certainly there with somebody I knew and was comfortable with, because we were standing in line waiting to go and get on the shuttle to go home. And we were probably a good halfway up the line, so there's probably as many people behind us at least as there was in front of us. And then while we're standing in line with this other person who we hadn't really seen most of the day. I hadn't really seen Dom most of the day because he was positioned elsewhere inside the bar. We saw each other in the holding area, like during the pizza party. Most of the time we spent together was talking to each other in this line. And we were having a conversation about a lot of different things that we both cared about. And this other person was just in their own world. And then they started talking about another actor that they had a crush on. I'm not going to name names. The story just kept evolving from there. And then they started singing a song that they had, or a parody of a song that they had made for this actor, like to us, as if they were singing to the actor. And this is the point where it was like, okay, this is getting very uncomfortable. So me and Dom both looked at each other and we both made an excuse at the same time, like, oh yeah, I left something back there. And Dom's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna help you look for it. It's kind of embarrassing. I probably shouldn't be telling this story, but yeah, we totally like bailed the line to get away from this person. What's worse is this: we only got like maybe 20 feet away from them. We went away from the line, went back behind the alleyway area for like just a minute, like we were looking for something. We came back to the back of the line. Then we're at the back of the back line. Like I said, we're only like 20 feet away away from this person who was kind of weirding us out a little bit, they come over back to us and they're like, I wasn't bothering you, was I? Did I say something to upset you? This is the part that makes me feel bad because I lied. I was like, no, I just lost something. I don't want to cut the line, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, I have somebody holding my spot. I'm sure they'd be cool if you come back to your spot. I'm like, and we're like, no, we're cool. We're having a conversation anyway. It's all right. And they're like, okay. And I think that they bought it, but it was half true that we're having a conversation. But the other half was, yeah, they did totally disturb us. And again, that happens on a set when you're working background. You have to understand one thing about the background world. It's one of the only jobs you can get almost anywhere nowadays where no background check is required. And it pays well. You can basically make your own schedule because it's all about when you're available to work. So you add all those factors together, and what happens is not everybody on a set working background is somebody who's looking to be a mainstream actor like myself. Some of them are just people looking to work and earn a living, and some of them are criminals. It's a fact. So yeah, I'm not really too ashamed of avoiding somebody that made me uncomfortable, because the fact of the matter is you always do have to look out for yourself. If somebody's acting in a way that you don't feel safe, you shouldn't put yourself in a position where you don't feel safe. That's just how I feel about that. A sad place to leave the story on, but really that's kind of where it all ended. We eventually got on a shuttle, and we took that back to the Universal lot. I turned in that awesome red leather jacket. I hope I have a picture of it. If I do, I'm going to put it up here. Might have already shown it on the screen. So that was the darker side of working in the background. As I already said, is an unfortunate place to leave it, but here, I'll try to cheer you up with another clip from my community theater days. Thanks for watching.
Oh, look, he's come down to earth amongst us.
Oh, listen. Since we stopped anyway. Okay, so it took 2 days to get the set up, so we won't have time for a dress rehearsal. Just think of opening night as the dress rehearsal, okay? As long as we can get through the play once tonight for doors and sardines. That's what it's all about. Doors and sardines. Getting on, getting off. Getting the sardines on, getting the sardines off. That's farce. That's theater. That's life.
Oh boy, you're so deep.
So just keep going. Bang, bang, bang. Bang, you're on. Bang, you said it. Bang, you're off. And everything will be perfect. Where's Selsden?
Oh no!
No, Brady!